This is week 2 of our summer practice challenge. We're doing D major this week. Welcome back. Welcome to the studio. My name is Cassie and I'm a professional violist and teaching artist. So on week 2 of our summer practice challenge, we're going to do D major scale and arpeggio, a Wohlfahrt Etude, and then a solo from the Barbara Barber book. Just continuing on from where we left off before the summer challenge started. So, as always, if you want any of my sheet music with all my fingerings, it's on Patreon. We'd love to have you in our community there. I'm going to get started with D major, and as always, we're going to talk about a different practice technique for each scale. So for D major, we're going to do the same rhythmic divisions as we did in the last one. We're going to do 2 octaves, starting first finger on the C string. We're going to do half notes first, then slurred quarter notes, slurred eighth notes, and then we'll end with the arpeggio, and I'll call things out before we get there. I'm going to set my metronome to 60, and the trick on this one is I'm always going to be doing double stops. So when I start out, I'm starting with my first finger on the C string, and I'm going to be playing the open string above it. So it will sound like this. When I get to G, I'm going to play G and D together, etc. And I'll continue on that way up and down the scale just for the half notes. So here's 60. We're going to do 2 beats per bow to start out with double stops. Ready? Go. Arpeggio, D, F sharp, A, D, F sharp, A, D, back down, A, F sharp, D, A, F sharp, D minor, so F natural, on that scale, if playing double stops is tricky, one thing that I see is common in my students is sometimes their elbow's not under the instrument enough, so you start hitting the other double stop string. So for instance, if I started on the C and the G string, my first finger wasn't on the tip enough, so my elbow's not underneath. I'm gonna get instead of. So just make sure if you feel like your finger is touching the upper string, swing your elbow a little bit closer to your belly button to see if that will fix the problem, because we really do need to be on our fingertips for those double stops to work. The other thing you want to take note of is if the double stops are too hard for you and you're just not there yet, just do the regular scale without the double stop and work your way towards that. Maybe first finger and an open string is easier, or second finger and the open string is easier, but 3 is a little bit hard. So build it up in pieces if you need to. As always, we want to go from what's simple or what's easier for us and then build on complexity as we go. And that's a great part of the summer practice challenge, is that you are building those skills in order to kind of not lose what you gained over the regular playing or school year. So with that said, we're done with our scale. We're going to move on to our etude. This is from the Wohlfahrt book, and this is etude number 29. And this one is also in D major because we're going to work on a key a week. And there's a couple of different things that we're going to talk about in this etude. We're doing this for solidifying our intonation. There's a lot of string crossings in it. And then we're going to talk about bow distribution. So for that, I have 5 different practice techniques, and we'll talk through each one of those. We're not going to go through the whole etude. If you want to go through the whole etude on your own, by all means do that, but we're going to play just about the first half of it. So at the very beginning, we're in D major, and this is just a bunch of D major arpeggios. So I'm going to start out doing a bunch of separate bows, and I'm going to put my tuner on just to keep myself honest and keep my intonation really, really solid. So let's try that. We're going to go super duper slow, just play each note for 2 beats, and we're going to solidify that intonation. So first finger's on D, then F sharp, use 4th finger, next measure F sharp, when I'm doing these practice techniques, I don't want to go through the whole etude. I'm going to pick a little spot of it, perfect that little spot, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. So we just did that all separate bows just to kind of get our intonation solidified. We didn't worry about the rhythm. If that was a struggle for you, stop the video and practice just separate bows and come back to the rest of the video when you're ready for it. So step 2, we're going to do double stops. Just like we did in the D major warm-up scale, I'm going to use a double stop with each note. So when I start on that D, I'm going to use D and open G. This one's going to sound really clashy. Then I'm going to go to first finger and open D. And then I'm going to match my 4th with open D. Now leave your 1 set and play 1, the A, and F sharp 3 as a double stop. Moving on with our F sharp, we're going to play F sharp and G. Then keep that F sharp set. 1 and open D. And then keep that 1 set, or you can use open A. So the gist of this is when we're practicing with double stops, especially when I have fast notes and with fast string crossings, which we're going to have when we play this at tempo, we want to make sure that our hand frame is solid. And one really great way of doing that is by practicing double stops. So it doesn't really matter what double stops you choose. I'm just kind of arbitrarily choosing when I want to leave a finger down and when I want to use an open string. That's really up to you. But we're going to continue on just the rest of that line. So I'm starting with 3rd measure, first finger, and I'm going to use open D because that's my very next note. And then I'm going to use open D and A, F sharp and open A, and then I'm going to match my 4 to my open A. Same idea here, always open D and open A. So again, I did 4 measures. I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the next step with just those 4 measures. When I move on, I can restart the process that we did at the very beginning with step 1. So as you're doing these double stops, another thing to watch out for, again, is making sure that your elbow level is correct. And then maybe don't always choose the open string option if that's the easier option. If leaving a first finger down is more difficult for you, try to challenge yourself, because when we go faster, it's going to be easier to leave fingers down. So now that we did the double stops, we're going to practice our string crossings. So I'm going to start with my first finger on D, and every time I have a string crossing, I'm going to stop my bow, make sure that my bow elbow is bringing me to the new string level, and then move on to the next one. So to demonstrate in that first measure, stop, and make sure my elbow moved to the correct level, elbow up, elbow down, elbow down, elbow up, elbow up, elbow down, elbow down, elbow up, down, down, up. So again, you might want to stop the video and just practice that first line. I do like to say out loud the direction that my elbow's going because it's just one extra confirmation that my elbow's going the correct direction. So let's try it together one more time, and I will say the directions out loud for us. So we're starting with a tall or high elbow, down, up, down, down, up, up, down, up, down, down, up. I even missed one in there, one directional. So it's really important to do this slowly and make sure that your elbow is moving as soon as your bow stops. Don't wait. So we don't want this. At the very last minute, you're lunging for it. You want to make sure that your bow is set and ready well in advance of your left hand. So that's step 4. We're going to do stop bows for every single note this time, and that's also to help coordinate and work on our bow distribution. So that will look like this. Etc. And my goal is going to be right now, because we're at a slow tempo, to use an almost full bow for each slur. So at the half measure, I want to make sure that I start at the frog, half measure, end at the tip, and then I make my way back to the frog at the end of the measure. So let's try that together. Ready? Go. Stops. Back to the frog. Back to the frog. All the way to the tip. Frog. Another thing to watch out for when you're doing these stops is that you're not letting your bow chomp. And I'll show you what I mean by that. We don't want to see this, where the bow's constantly unengaging. You want to keep a pretty consistent amount of arm weight when you're doing your stops, which would look like this. So there's less chomping, or the stick going towards the hair. We don't want to see that. So that was our 4/5 practice steps, and then I would just do that first line as printed, and I'm going to keep my metronome set to 60, and this will be our beat. So we're going to fit 4/16 per click. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if that was too difficult, if it was too fast, I can slow it down. I can use that as the half tempo. So it would be 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E, etc. So stop the video, go through the steps as you need to. Again, I would not recommend ever doing the full etude unless that's your goal. That's what you're working on this week, is the etude. But again, etudes just means study, and we're just doing a study of several techniques with this Wohlfahrt. So you can continue all of those steps on the next lines. I stopped kind of halfway down, so I stopped at 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th line, because it kind of repeats when we get to that 5th line. So there are different arpeggios that we're going to encounter later on, not just D major, and it might be really great for you to practice that hand frame for those other keys as we go through the piece. So now that we've kind of worked through a little bit of the etude, I just want to do a playthrough to that line that I mentioned before. It's about the 5th line. I'm going to set my metronome a little bit slower to 50, and this is the quarter note. 1, 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Really, any of the practice techniques that we talked about in this etude you could apply to your solo piece, you could apply to your scale. I'm just trying to throw out a lot of ideas so that maybe something you've never heard of, you could apply to your own practice, or maybe something that you've heard of before and kind of forgot about, you can implement in your own practice. So now that we've worked our way through the scale and the etude, we're going to go on to the solo for this week, which is Scherzo from the Barbara Barber book. If you've been following the channel before the summer practice challenge, we were working out of that book, and this is just a little bit further on. It's on page 22 if you wanted to follow along. And again, all of my music that we're doing, all of the scales, the etude with all of my fingerings, and then the solo with all of my fingerings and markings is going to be on Patreon available if you'd like to join us there. So for the Scherzo, we've got a couple of different techniques. At the beginning, eventually we're going to get to some spiccato / sautille stroke. So I do have a video on that, and I'll post it above so that if you're unfamiliar with that stroke, you can have a little bit of extra practice on that. That's the beginning part. This is kind of like an A, B, A form. So the opening Scherzo is going to use a lot of spiccato sautille, and then the second page, the meno mosso, is going to be a little bit more lyrical. Now, they are indicating at the beginning that the tempo should be quarter note equals 144. We're not going to go quite that fast because we're going to work our way up to that. So right now, to read through it, we're going to start at 88. And this, is again, is our quarter note, so our 16th note will sound. Now, if this is the first time you're seeing this piece, you might want to stop the video, read through a little bit, and then rejoin us when you're ready to go a little bit more at tempo. We're going to do it at 88, and I'll talk us through just that beginning section. So we're on the first and second lines until the repeat, and then we'll stop and talk a little bit. Start at the beginning, right in the middle of the bow, and this will not be off the string because it's not quite fast enough yet. So stay in the middle and work on really, really tiny strokes. Imagine like you're in a tiny space and you can't really move your arms that much. Ready? Go. Shift. Then we're going to repeat, beginning. So far, it's just like a D major arpeggio, kind of like what we did in the warm-up and kind of like what we did in the etude. Lots of D major arpeggios and scales in this piece in particular. There is one shift in measure 10, and that's kind of you need to practice like shooting for that target a little bit. So in measure 10, we've got 2 A's, and then out of the blue, you kind of have to find third position. So the ways to practice that are, I'm going to play those 2 A's, I'm going to tap my 3, and then I'm going to try to match that position with my 1. If that's really difficult for you to do without sound, you could also do it with sound. So I'll play those 2 A's, I'll play the 3, use my 1 to shift up, and just try to see if I can match it. If you're overshooting it, you might be shifting too quickly, which looks like this. So your shift is just a little bit too fast. If you're undershooting it, you might be shifting a little bit too slow. So it's kind of like that Goldilocks zone. We have to find the appropriate speed for the piece that we're in, and this is a quick piece, so your shift's going to have to be a little bit on the quicker side. So as always, stop the video if you need to, practice that one little shift. And in the next measure, I don't shift back to first position, I stay in third position, because when we do not do the repeat, we're in third position again. And I don't really need to shift extraneously down to first position, because at rehearsal B or number 13, we're still back in third position. So we're going to continue on at letter B in third position. And here my finger pattern is that my 4 and my 3 touch. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to shift here just a half step backwards, not to first position, but kind of like second and a half position, which looks like this. 1. So really what my shift is, up close, that's hard to get out of the blue, you can practice going from first finger D back and forth between D and C sharp. And again, you might need to stop the video to practice that. I don't need to shift all the way back to first position when it's really just that one note that I need. So I'm trying to save myself a little bit of effort there. So let's go back to B. And the rest of this page is all just kind of the same thing with different notes. Ready? Letter B. First position. Low 2. We've got a ritardando, which means to slow down, and a diminuendo, which means to get quiet. So that's setting us up for the mano mosso, which is on the very next page in measure 33. So you might want to stop the video to practice that tempo. You might want to stop the video to practice getting the tempo up. We will do a nat tempo playthrough later on, but I just want to get through the piece first. So in the mano mosso, I'm going to leave my metronome off just for a second. Here, it's the exact opposite. Instead of doing those really tiny contained strokes, we want to use a lot of bow here. So I'm going to set myself up at the measure before, so the measure 32, so that I'm as low in the bow as possible, so I have the whole bow to use for these legato notes. Tiny diminuendo, because that's the end of our phrase. Shift to third position. 2, and then scooch that 2 up. Next phrase. First position. Shift to third with a crescendo. Stay in third. First. So one of the great things about the fingerings that they've put in the piece already is that we're utilizing our open strings to shift between positions a lot of the time. When it's not that, like we just had in measure 51, 2, 3, measure 54, we had that expressive shift to the height of our phrase, and that's kind of nice. We could do, but that's kind of a little bit too sloppy for the mood of this piece. The next measure after that, when we've got the 8th notes, we're using that open D to shift back, so don't wait for the last minute. Shift. Waiting looks like this. We're just going to kind of influence your bow to maybe accent, or it's just not going to feel as comfortable and fluid as we want if you're waiting. So as soon as you've got that note started, shift all the way back. Tempo 1 goes back to D major. So the mano mosso is in G major. We're back in D major. And this is kind of the same thing that we had at the beginning. We've got those tiny bows, middle of the bow. It's a lot of the same of what we had at the beginning. There's a little bit of difference when we get towards the end, but nothing too crazy. I do want to touch on the very last 2 measures because we have false harmonics here. So it looks like the note has been hollowed out in the last measure. So we're going to play open A. And then where my 3 would usually go, I'm going to put harmonic weight finger, and I can't have any other fingers touching. So up close, that looks like this. So I'm not depressing the string, I'm sitting right on top of it. From this angle, from this angle. So you know when you shift way up here, we've got harmonics up there. We have them everywhere on the instrument, and they're most prominent at octaves or fifths. So on the A string again, barely touch and only let your 3rd finger touch. And then it's the same thing in the next measure, just on the D string. And that's the sound that you should be getting. It should be nice and ringy. If it sounds a little bit dead, you're not quite in the sweet spot. And it's literally a millimeter different, and you have to be on the fingertip for it to really sound true. So check those things if it's sounding a little bit dead for you. Now that we've done our really quick walkthrough, I want to do a slow playthrough. So we're going to do the whole thing, even though there's ritardandos and accelerandos, and we're just going to do the same tempo just for right now. So we're going to do it at 88. Whole thing from the beginning. 1, 2, ready, go. we've done our slow tempo playthrough, before we do our at tempo playthrough, I do just want to talk quickly about the spiccato stroke. So what's worked really well for me is kind of a, I don't know if it's weird or not, but it took me years to learn this stroke and I still struggle with it. So if you struggle with it too, just know that you're in really good company. What worked for me is I'm going to go in the middle of my bow and I'm going to use a really heavy arm weight to push and sing into the string. It's going to sound really ugly at first, and it should sound really ugly. And gradually, I'm going to keep that same amount of bows, so it's going to stay very tiny bows, but I'm going to release the arm weight. So make it sound super grotesque to start out with. Release the arm weight. And eventually it should start bouncing. We did talk briefly in the last video about how to find your balance point. So it literally is where your bow balances on your finger. And mine's about there. Everybody's is a little bit different in a different spot. So find your balance point. You're going to want to try to aim probably within a range of 1 inch of that balance point, because that's where the bow bounces the easiest. If this doesn't work for you, the heavy sinking into the string, you might want to check how loose your wrist is. It's going to feel like a whisking motion. So like if you're whisking up an egg, it's going to feel like that. And it's not to say that your wrist is the one that's responsible for making the bow move. It's just making sure everything here is kind of loose and just letting it react to the motion of your arm. So if my wrist is too tight, when I release that weight, it's not going to bounce because there's just too much rigidity or inflexibility here. So you really do want to make sure that that wrist is nice and loose and flexy. The other thing to check for is that your pinky is really curvy and your thumb is really curvy underneath. If these start to go straight, it's going to be, again, too inflexible and the bow's just not going to bounce. So check for those 2 points if you're struggling with this stroke. And then again, practice really slowly with the metronome and kind of slowly build up the tempo. It is a lot easier at 88 to try to incorporate that stroke as it is at 120, which is what we're going to do right now. So make sure your bow's right in the middle. We're going to set and leave it in that one little spot. Really, really tiny strokes. I'll count 3 measures. I'll count 2 measures and we'll start. 1, 2, ready, go. Successful with the spiccato stroke and the legato strokes on that run through, and just because we can, we're going to do it at 144, just that very first page, so that you get a feel for what the actual tempo requested is. So I will set my metronome for this. Remember, really, really tiny strokes in the middle, nice, loose, relaxed, flexible arm. 1, 2, ready, go. found this enjoyable. If there's things that I kind of blew past that you're still wondering about, please post it in the comments below. I like to try to help from afar. Next week, we're going to move on to a new key center, a new etude, and then a new solo piece. If you have any requests, put those in the comments too. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one. Happy practicing.